Hi and welcome to my Sukkah, from which I'd like to share with you some thoughts on this Yom Tov of Succot, known by many different names, but one of the names that we refer to it as during our prayers, during various other tefillot, during various times, is Zman Simchateinu, the time of our rejoicing, a time of joy, a time of celebration. Now we associate a lot of the celebration towards the end, in fact not with Sukkot at all, with Simchat Torah and the celebration of the completion of reading the annual cycle of reading from the Torah and the dancing that goes along with it. However, the Zman Simchateinu, the time for Simcha, is in fact over the course of Sukkot. And I'd like to share some insights into what this means. What is the nature of the joy, the Simcha, that is so much associated with this Yom Tov, should be associated with this Yom Tov. I'd like to share with you some thoughts about what that is and what we should be aspiring to. What sort of joy? When the Torah says "V'samachta b'chagecha," you should rejoice on your festivals, and in particular, as we'll see soon, Sukkot is associated with Simcha. What is the joy? What is the Simcha that we're meant to be having? What are we rejoicing about? What should we aspire to rejoice? So I'd like to begin by sharing with you a fascinating medrash. It's in Vayikra Rabbah, where it talks about in Vayikra, which is the laning of the first day of, not the book of Vayikra, not the portion of Vayikra, but in the book of Vayikra we read from the Torah on the first day of Yom Tov, all about, not surprisingly, all about the different Yom Tovim, and in particular, it's included in there. We read about Sukkot and the Arba Minim and everything related to that. And the Medrash says, comments on, excuse me, Lekachtem lochem, that the introduction to the Arba Minim, the four species, the Torah says, Lekachtem lochem, you should take for yourself, which we understand from that. Lochem, for yourself, means that you need to own your own. There are ways of borrowing it on the return, on the basis of being able to give it back and so on. But in an ideal world, we should own our own, and the reality is that particularly in the current climate with COVID and Corona and the restrictions, owning your own is the absolute ideal, not only from a Torah point of view, but from a health and safety point of view. So health and safe health and safety. Yeah. So lekachtem lochem, the Torah says you should take for yourself, and it tells us about the four species: Pri Etz Hada, Kapetz Moira, Nafetz Avos, and so on. And the Medrash says that this is the Lekachtem Lochem, Hadahu Dechsev. This is the meaning of what it says, and quotes a pasuk in Tehillim, which says, King David HaMelech says, Todi'eni Oirach Chaim, make known to me. So he's asking from Hashem, please make known to me Oirach Chaim, the length of life, Sova Samachos. Sova Samachos means I should be satisfied with simchas, with happiness, with smachas. And within that paragraph of the Medrash, the Medrash gives one interpretation of the connection between the two pasukim, meaning the four species and the Arba Minim, and the Sukkah and Sukkot, and this pasuk of Sova Samacha says as follows: Al tihi karakain, don't read it like that, meaning Sova Samachas, Ela Sheva Samachas, not Sova satisfying of Simcha, but Sheva Samachas, 7 Samachas. Why? Because it says Eilu Sheva Mitzvahs Shebachag. These are the 7 mitzvahs that are associated with Sukkot. So here's a quiz you can ask round the table. What are the 7 mitzvahs associated with Sukkot? Can you come up with 7 mitzvahs associated with Sukkot? So here's the answer for you that you can share with them. The Medrash details it. So 4, of course, are the Arba Minim. We've got 4 species. We've got the Lulav, the Etrog, the Hadassim, and the Aravot, and therefore that's 4. We've got, in addition to that, the Sukkah. That's a 5th mitzvah. And then we have 2 further ones which people might struggle to get. One doesn't apply today, that's why, and that is the Chagiga, the Korban Chagiga. Every festival there was a mitzvah to bring a Korban. We know it from Pesach, we're more familiar with it, because on Pesach we have on the Seder plate the egg and the bone. And the egg is there to remind us of the Korban Chagiga, the festival, the Yom Tov offering that was brought for every Yom Tov. So there's a mitzvah to bring in temple times the festival offering. And the 5th one is Simcha. There's a mitzvah, there's a direct instruction, a mitzvah command in the Torah of simcha, of joy on this festival. And it goes on to explain, Im simcha lama chagiga, vim chagiga lama simcha. Why do you need these last two? If you've got the rejoicing of the festival through the korban and the sacrifice, why do you need simcha? That should be enough of rejoicing. So it brings an opinion that gives an analogy. This is mashal, this is an analogy. Two people who are going into a judgment, and you don't know which one's going to be victorious. You see two people going into the courthouse for a verdict. You don't know which one is going to be victorious. So how do you know who was victorious? You haven't heard the judgment, you see them coming out. How do you know who's going to be victorious and who's not? Well, the one that's victorious is usually coming out triumphant, hands up in the air, smiling, at various gestures, but certainly they might be holding a verdict in the hand, holding something up, showing something. You can usually see from the body language and from what's in their hands and their gestures that the one who's victorious. Says the Medrash, so too, that Israel and the nations of the world, they come together for judgment in front of Hashem. When is this? On Rosh Hashanah. The Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is the time of judgment. And we don't yet know who is victorious. We don't know yet what the verdict is. But what happens? But when, says the Medrash, how do we know who is victorious? What do they come out with? What do we come out of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur with? We come out with lulaveim ve'esrogehem beyadan, says the Medrash. Lulav and esrog in our hands. So on the Yodin, then we know the Israel inon nitzchai. Then we know that the Jewish people have been victorious, and therefore Moshe warns them and says, "Ulakachtem lachem b'yom rishon." You should take on the first day. You should take this. This is a symbol of victory, that we've come out victorious. We've come out with a good judgment from Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and that's a fascinating Medrash in of itself. But the point in particular that I'd like to pick up on is this number 7, the 7 happiness, Sheva Samachas, it says. This verse should be read Sheva Samachas, 7 rejoices. It links it to the 7 mitzvahs. And I'd like to take this another stage further, because in addition to the 7 mitzvahs, we have within the 4 species, with the Arba Minim itself, we have 7, the number 7. Because we of course have 1 lulav, 1 esrog, and we have 3 hadassim, 2 aravas. So we've got 7 there as well. So the number 7 is there as well. Now we'll also, I'm sure, be very familiar, many of you will be familiar, that the Arba Minim, the 4 species, are compared to the Jewish people. That each one of the species represents another type of Jewish person. And that's depending on because they have a smell and a taste. Some of them you can eat, some of them have a nice smell. So for example, the esrog, which you can eat, although not on Succot, you can make jam and other things with it, preserve and so on. And it smells very, very, it has a nice smell. That represents a Jewish person who has both flavor, meaning you can taste it, meaning there is Torah and mitzvah. So that the Torah and mitzvahs represents this concept of having these 2 elements of flavor, which is the Torah, and a smell, which represents mitzvahs, commandments. And then there is a continuation of the other 3 as well. You've got the other extreme with the willow. The arava doesn't have either, and that represents a Jewish person who might have Torah and mitzvahs, but that's not their nature. That's not what they're involved with. They don't necessarily study Torah regularly, or very much, maybe even. And mitzvahs, they don't consciously. They're not an observant person. But we bind them all together. I'm sure you've heard all the different sermons over the years of the unity of the Jewish people come together. Sukkot, that's what happens. So we see that the Arba Minim, the 4 species, represents the Jewish people. And the number 7 also is a significant number for the Jewish people, because the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, had 7 branches. And we know from our prophets, from Tanakh, that this was this is an analogy for the Jewish people, that the 7 branches of the menorah is also representative of the Jewish people, and that was a prophecy that was there, and it's a Haftarah also that we read it. And so the number 7, you can see, is quite significant. It links to various elements of Sukkot, of the Jewish people, brings it all together, and particularly this idea of 7 rejoicing, 7 levels of joy. And that's what I'd like to share with you as well, is what is this joy that is being discussed? The seven levels of joy. So I'd like to share with you these 7 levels of joy that we should be thinking about, we should try and aspire to. Not easy to achieve, but at the same time, this is what we have. So they're in 2 groups. The first group is a group of 3, which is a joy associated with creation as a whole, and then there are more specific joy associated with the Jewish people and us as individuals. So here they are. Level number 1. The first stage of joy is the joy that each individual should aspire to have because of the very fact that they've been created. And I'll explain these in a little bit more detail in a moment. The next level is a greater joy. In addition to that, is that in what form were we created? We're called Adam. Adam, it means not only man, but it means Adam Elyon. We are created in the image of God. And God said, what did God say? Let us make man in our image. But Salmeinu Kidmosenu, we are in the image of God, and I explained to you what that means. But we are not just created in like all the rest of the animals, but there's an element of us that has the image of God, and that is a joy that we should have, that we're blessed with this. And thirdly, as a general point of joy in creation, is that there is a concept that God created, a Zman Simchateinu, a time for rejoicing. Set aside a particular time to be to rejoice and to have a concept of simcha and joy that we should think about, that we should work towards, that we should have. And so those are levels 1, 2, and 3. And then we move into the more specific, and that is relating to us as the Jewish people and as individuals. So level number 4 is the joy that we have the opportunity, the merit to serve God. Not just that we were created for a purpose. What is that purpose? To serve God. We have a mission, we have a purpose. There is a joy that we should aspire to have, in that we have a sense of purpose and mission. We can all relate to that, and again, more in a few moments. And the next level, level number 5, is the joy, in addition to that we serve God in general, the specific commandment that we have in the Torah that says that Avadato es Hashem lekecha b'simcha v'tov levav. It's actually as part of the curses, but in Devarim, in the book of Devarim, where it says that Tachas Hashem lo Avadato es Hashem lekecha, the curses will come because you did not serve God with joy. So meaning we have a mitzvah of serving Hashem with joy, with simcha. So there's a specific creation of the mitzvah of serving Hashem with simcha. That's level number 5. Level number 6, and that is the addition to the general concept of all mitzvahs we should serve God generally with joy, is that we have a time, a moyadim lesimcha, that God created a period of time, the festivals in general, all of the festivals, all the Yom Tovim, there is a concept of simcha associated with a time of simcha. And then finally, we come to the ultimate, which is that there is not just festival, the concept of times of simcha, but there is a Zman Simchateinu, there is a specific time called Succot, where we should focus. The main emphasis and focus is rejoicing and joy. So let's look at these 7 levels. Maybe let's call them the 7 Ushpizin of Simcha. That's the other 7 that we know associated with Yom Tov. Each day we are visited in the Sukkah, and we have a prayer that we say at Tefillah, welcoming the Ushpizin, the guests that we have. So these are the 7 Ushpizin of Simcha. And maybe we can work towards it. Each day we spend a few moments thinking about these levels of Simcha. So level number 1, as I mentioned, is the Simcha that we were created, the joy that the mere fact that we exist, our existence, that we exist, that God created us, that already is a reason to rejoice. Not always, as I said, not always easy. We don't always feel it, but it's something that we should aspire to. The Yom Tov calls on us to think about and to aspire to finding the joy in being able to exist as we are. And the very basic level, that's the starting point. And the fact that we are there. Once we've achieved that, we can grow in our joy, in our simcha, by taking it to the next level, as I said, in the way in which that we're created compared to in the image of God. What does it mean in the image of God? So there are many different explanations on this in the image of God, but the one I'd like to share with you is as follows. And that is that we feel our existence, and in a way, very often, we don't feel anything else. So Hashem is the only existence. The only existence that exists is Hashem. When Hashem, whatever He is experiencing, if you can, talking about human language, Hashem doesn't feel and have emotions, but there is a concept of He is the only Hashem Echad. All that exists in this world is godliness, is God, and so too with us. We are created in a way that we are unique in ourselves, and we think about, so to speak, ourselves in comparison to, in a similar way. So when we talk about that we're in the image of God, meaning that we feel ourselves as being the center of the universe. Now that's not always such a good thing, but it's not necessarily such a bad thing either. We are told everybody should say Bishvili nivra ha'olam. that the world was created for me. Why? Because it means that everything that's here has a purpose that I can put it to good use and create a positive purpose for this. So saying being very self-centered in this way, Bishvili Nivra Olam, everything exists for me, is actually a positive, and that's in the image of Hashem. Just like everything in this world exists for Hashem, so too everything exists for me to use for the purpose of Hashem. And that is a greater joy to say, I exist, but I exist for a purpose. I exist to be able to serve Hashem. And then we have the third level, which we come to, which is which I mentioned earlier, which is that there is a time that Hashem created. This is all relating to creation. Hashem created a time where we rejoice. A Zman Simchateinu, a time that we rejoice. This is the third level. Which is Yom Tov. We have a periods of time which is Yom Tov, where that Yom Tov, the concept of a Yom Tov is Moyadim L'Simcha, which we say in our davening and so on, times to rejoice, as opposed to Shabbos. For example, Shabbos is a time for pleasure. It's oineg, pleasure. We want to enjoy, whereas Yom Tov is more about rejoicing. It's all joy, but it's a different type of joy. One's a pleasure, the joy in pleasure, and the other one is a rejoicing, a celebration, a happiness. And of course, specifically, Succot, Zman Simchateinu, the time of our Simcha, which I'll come on to. So those are the three levels. Again, level 1 is the fact that we exist. Level 2, we exist for a purpose. And level 3, that we, within our existing for a purpose, God has set aside times that we should exist in a celebratory, joyous way. Ideally, and hopefully every day is a joyous day, but there's times where we can take things to another level. This is maybe the precursor to setting aside certain days in the calendar to focus on certain things. So there's the concept of Mother's Day and Father's Day and Valentine's Day and all the other things that we have in the non-Jewish calendar. But actually, there's a concept of this in the Jewish calendar as well, where Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, each day has a Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur is about Teshuvah. Does that mean we don't do Teshuvah the rest of the year? Of course it doesn't. Ideally, we should be doing Teshuvah regularly. But there's an appointed time where it's more auspicious for that theme. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur is auspicious for Teshuvah. Sukkot is about Zman Simchateinu. It's an auspicious time, just like every Yom Tov is meant to be celebratory. We know from the fact that it mentions the word Simcha so often in the Torah, relating to 3 times, in fact, relating to Simcha, then we're meant to be particularly focused on joy and rejoicing at this time. So those are those 3 levels relating to creation. Relating to taking the next 4 levels, which is relating to us as individuals. So here we have, this is about what we actually can do. So the practical. So before it's conceptual, and now we're talking about in practice, what do I do? So level number 4 is the fact that the simcha, the joy to be able to serve God practically, in the reality of serving Hashem. The fact that I can actually serve Hashem, I can do things that means that I'm serving Hashem. There is a joy in being able to, not just a concept that exists for a purpose, but fulfilling that purpose. Fulfilling the purpose to make the world into a better place, to add meaning, value, purpose to the world. That is a joy that we should have in being able to have a sense of purpose, practically actually doing it. And we know in our own lives that you can't compare something in concept, and when we actually get to do something, we talk about something, we read about something, we plan to do something, to get something new, to buy something, whatever it may be. When we actually getting that, that's why you make the shechiyonu on something new when you're actually wearing a new item of clothing, because that is the greater level of joy. It's one thing having a new suit in the cupboard or a new dress in the cupboard, but it's a completely another level when we actually get to wear it and to put it on. To the extent that there's even a question as whether one should make a shechiyonu when trying on clothes and trying on new clothes, but ultimately we don't. But so that is the 4th level where we practically are able to serve Hashem. The 5th level is a greater joy, which is the joy of being able to serve Hashem with joy. So as I mentioned earlier, we have this commandment of that we should be serving Hashem with joy. So that's such a wonderful thing. Not only am I able to serve Hashem and add value to this world and add meaning, have a sense of purpose, but I'm instructed to do it in a joyous way. And that is a wonderful thing. So I'm joyous about the fact that I need to be joyous. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It feeds into each other, and it's a cycle of joy that it creates around us. And that's the aspiration that we should have. Again, it's not easy, but this is what we should think about on Sukkot and the time of our joy. What does it mean, joy with what? And what we should be working towards, what we should aspire to. The 6th level is the level of simcha relating to a specific mitzvah. That specific mitzvah is simcha, meaning in addition to the simcha of that a person has, whether it is to serve Hashem and whether it is to serve Hashem with joy, there is a specific command, which is that there is a time moyadim lesimcha. There's a concept of v'samachta b'chagecha. You should rejoice on your festivals. Ein simcha ela b'basar v'yayin. You have the simcha. You can't have simcha unless you have meat and wine, which is why it's a mitzvah to have for your meals meat and wine at the Yom Tov and Shabbos meals. There is a simcha that we have that, and then finally the final level, the highest level that we try and work towards, to aspire to think about, to achieve in some way, is the simcha of Yom Tov, of Chag HaSukkos, of Yom Tov, as in contrast to the other Yom Tovim. So there's simcha associated with the other Yom Tovim. But when we understand moyadim lesimcha, time for simcha, when is the ultimate time for simcha, as I mentioned, is Zman Simchateinu, the time of our simcha. And as the Medrash tells us, that you find, as I mentioned earlier, that there is simcha is written 3 times when it comes to Succot. Not with the others. By Shavuos it's written only once, and by Pesach you actually don't find it at all. That might be associated with the Pesach cleaning and other things done. But there's a different theme, there's a different approach of what we're doing. Whereas the time really where we're meant to focus on simcha is the time of Sukkot, and that's when the main is. So when we say Zman Simchateinu, when we say in our davening, and when we say in our benching, and whenever it is, and when we're singing, and we say V'samachta mechagecha Zman Simchateinu, the time of rejoicing, what does it mean? I hope that I've been able to give you some insights into some of the spiritual dimensions of spiritual joy on this Yom Tov for the 7 days, the 7 Ushpizin of Simcha, and hopefully you can spend some time on each of the days thinking about these, contemplating what it means in our lives and how we do it each day, and to better ourselves and try and achieve on some level, some concept and maybe practical aspect of the simcha of each day, the 7 levels of simcha associated with Zman Simchateinu, the time of our rejoicing. I wish you a happy and a joyous Yom Tov. Chag Sameach.